Hello everyone and welcome to episode 17 of the IWFM webinar series. And today's episode is around lockdown lessons to empower workplace change in partnership and supported by Ricoh. So today we've got an exciting lineup of speakers as always. And just moving the slides along, I'm Peter Brogan, Head of Research and Insight at the IWFM, and hopefully we've got members and non-members on this webinar today that have seen me host many of our webinar series, and also very keen to get to the content as quick as possible, that you're not hearing about just me and what I do at the Institute, because that is on previous episodes. But as you can see there, we've got a stellar lineup today of two speakers, and we're going to kick off with a gentleman there, Ian Ellison, co-founder and director at Jedges, and then we're going to bring Simone Fenton-Jarvis into the debate, Workplace Services Consultancy Development Director at Ricoh. But what I like to do here is, rather than read off a script or someone's bio, I just like to bring the speakers in at this stage, just to give a little bit of background about themselves and just give you a little bit of flavour of what they're going to be discussing today on today's webinar. Just before I hand over to Ian, just want to remind listeners, viewers, that this webinar is being recorded and will be cascaded out and put on our website after the event has closed today. So Ian, if I can pass over to you, just give us a little bit of background about yourself, as well as a flavour of what you'd be discussing today, and then I'll pass on to Simone, if that's okay.
No worries, Peter. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, so my name's Ian Ellison, as Peter said, co-founder and director of Jedges. Jedges is a workplace consultancy. When I say workplace consultancy, it's more about business decisions and change that involves workspace and workplace, perhaps in a way that other management consultancies wouldn't think about things. So it's sort of recognizing the value of space. How I'm here? Well, 20 years in the industry. I stumbled into FM by accident. I developed my operational FM skills over a course of about 8 years whilst working for a telecoms company in the Northeast. I went back to university. I did a master's degree in facilities management at Sheffield Hallam. I discovered that I've always been a teacher. It's just I never had the right thing to teach. And all of a sudden, a sort of more educational world has opened up to me. So after a period of time at Sheffield Hallam, I left to found Jedges with my business partner, James Pinder. And for the past 3 or 4 years, we've been helping organisations make better decisions about workplaces. I'll talk a little bit about that in a couple of slides' time, but the main reason to be here today is I'm one of the authors of a series of 5 guidance notes, which represent the IWFM and Ricoh partnership. Those guidance notes are essentially a sequenced guide to workplace insight, leadership and change, which is what we're all about, and it's what you're all about, and it's what the flavour of this all is. So today I sort of want to start with the pandemic and the lockdown, and I want to show listeners how the 5 guidance notes can really bring to life the situation that we're in and can really help them. So even though they weren't written for the pandemic, they're super useful in that respect, and hopefully that's going to tee us up for Simone. So I'll shut up now. Simone, do you want to take over?
Hi everybody, so Simone Fenton-Jarvis, been working in FM for about 13 years, operationally, and then kind of moved into the more strategic as I moved on in my career. Went over to Sheffield Hallam and did a master's in FM. Ian was my lecturer at the time, so it's funny how the circles come around. And I think from my kind of thinking and my reflections over the last few years, it's been very much around how can we create the people-centric environments, but make sure that ultimately it's business-led into the people and into the support services. And I think often we get a bit drawn down the wrong path, especially with knee-jerk decisions like things like the pandemic. So it's what we're kind of going to talk about today, and I'll give you a bit of a case study around how the Ricoh approach is and how we have supported one customer in particular over the last few months. Ricoh is known as a print company, but we do a lot more than print. So I obviously head up the workplace consultancy area. We're ultimately creating people-centric environments and utilising the technologies to support that to happen and take us into the kind of future world. So I'll cover more of that later.
Thank you, Simone and Ian. And I just want to remind listeners, viewers, that we do have a Q&A session on today's webinar. So please fire through your questions as Ian and Simone go through their respective presentations. And as Ian's alluded to there, we've got a lot of how-to guides, so a lot of information to go through, so less talking from myself. So we're going to move on to Ian as our first speaker. So Ian, I'm just going to hand over control to you, dear.
Right, let me see if that pops up. Pregnant pause, Peter. I can't see the controls at this point. I can't see my mouse. Oh, yes, I can. I think they're there. Good. Okay. I should also say that that mugshot of me with glasses on, the one thing about lockdown we're discovering is that people don't recognize me without glasses, and it's freaking everybody out. But I don't need to wear them when I'm staring at a screen from here. So yeah, Mark Catchlove the other week, he was like, this just looks wrong. So I sort of told you about Three Edges a little bit of what we do, but so just one slide to sort of set the scene, because it's kind of important to set the scene in terms of the guidance notes I'm going to talk about, but also to set the scene in terms of the stuff that I want to say very briefly about pandemic and lockdown and kind of joining those dots. So as I said, Three Edges is all about workplace leadership, insight and change. Fundamentally for us, it's about powering up people, whether they be client organizations, whether they be workplace practitioners, whether they be more organizations within the sort of service provision of workplaces and workspaces. It's about powering people up to be able to make better workplace decisions. How do we do that? Well, we do that through consultancy. If we weren't actively consulting, frankly, there was no point in leaving university, because that's the stuff it's really hard to get at. You can research and teach at universities, but it's harder to get to the consultancy. We really want to roll our sleeves up and get stuck in with organizations. That helps us learn and keep things current so that we can kind of do commissioned research and do that, and not a word I'm comfortable with, but do that thought leadership piece. And all of this for us is really in service of learning and development, our own learning and development, and learning and development for the benefit of workplace, for businesses and for the industry. So I've put a plug there of my potato-headed mugshot, because we've got a podcast called Workplace Matters. It's not been active for a while, but there's still a cracking set of episodes, very highly regarded. People still write to me and kind of go, that really useful, found it really insightful. The key bit of feedback we get back is like, don't listen to this podcast unless you're prepared to take notes at the same time, because you'll have that many ideas. So go looking for Workplace Matters. It's a free resource, and it'll get you thinking about workplace the way that we think about workplace. Okay, so let's get started in earnest. So what work do we do with IWFM? Well, on the research side, we do a bunch of insights. Some of those we're going to talk about today, but we've been working with IWFM for quite a while now. It's Three Edges. And a longer relationship before that. So, helping inform the IWFM rebrand of a few years ago. There's some sort of higher level insight reports which are worth looking at. FM in the Future World of Work, the Workplace Paradigm, Managing Facilities or Enabling Communities, Embracing Technology to Move FM Forwards. What you're going to see when I start explaining workplace from a Three Edges perspective is that they're all picking up different parts of workplace and sort of showing the interlinkages and the relationships between them. So they're sort of quite high level, those reports. They've got research data, and then they're sort of proposing different sort of maybe slightly academic ways of thinking about things. But then what we've also got is we've got these 5 guidance notes, which are much more practical, and in some respects they're sort of like workbooks. There are sections of these guidance notes which, if you haven't seen them, they prompt you to think about your situation, make a few notes, reflect on this or that, and then move forward, so that you keep using them actively rather than sort of passively. And that's come back in the feedback that actually that's really useful, that's really valuable. So all of these resources you can get your mitts on for free. If you're not an IWFM member, I'm reliably informed that you may need to sign up to be able to access them on the website, but that doesn't include paying a membership fee. It just means that you can sign up to get to those resources, even if you're not a paid up member of IWFM. Now, over on the other side of things, on the learning and development side, in partnership with IWFM, we have the Workplace Leadership Program. We have now, I'm very proud to say, a level 6 diploma in workplace leadership, insight and change. It's Ofqual accredited, and it is, to the best of our knowledge, the very first qualification of its size, shape and kind pretty much in the world. So, we're pretty proud about that. It's 12 months, it's part-time, it's got 40 credits, which, we'll not worry about it now, but it's the right size to make it achievable for busy adults, but also kind of have that academic weight and gravitas that we need as our profession continues to professionalize. It's unit-based, it's all about community, small communities of learners together, 100% coursework, no exams, and varied individual and group assignments to bring the whole learning experience to life. There are different modules, and at the moment we've got over 50 learners from HMRC and the Government Property Agency working with us on this. So we're getting great and the initial feedback and engagement, and thoroughly enjoying it, actually. So if you're interested in the qualification, get in touch with IWFM Academy. Equally, if you're not up for a qualification but you're interested in CPD, then we've got 7 courses all looking at workplace from different angles. So again, get in touch with the Academy or have a look on the website if you'd like to know a little bit more. Okay, so let's make this much more real and much more current. Let's turn our attention to this pandemic. So I don't want to do this to death, and if I'm absolutely honest with you, I'm slightly uncomfortable talking like this because it's a really weird situation, and we've all said so much of the same stuff. If you've been on many webinars, lots of people, even coming from different professions and different angles, saying similar things about this. So for a while, I have to be honest with you, Three Edges, we kind of kept our powder dry a little bit, and we kind of were like watching what was going on and thinking, well, what does this mean for us? We were going through our own sort of response and change to the unfolding and highly uncomfortable and unknown situation, and so I sort of say these things cautiously at this point. This is highly unlikely to be solved quickly, irrespective of what we want and what we're hoping for and what politicians might promise us. The fact of the matter is the pandemic is still escalating globally, and so how we are in the UK, how we are in our country or in our city, we might be in a period of maybe relative calm or relative stasis, but actually we don't know what the future holds. But it would be at least sensible to be realistic and potentially cautious. There is no end in sight at this point. Medical advice is unfolding as the pandemic progresses. It's become increasingly politicized. So the whole changing attitudes to masks, the new information about aerosols and the impact upon, from an FM perspective and a building perspective, around HVAC and stuff like that. This is the situation that we're in. So all decisions are fluid, are in progress, based upon the best information we can get our mitts on as things unfold, because the research is unfolding in real time. And I think that leads to sort of one thing for me, which is assuming there's going to be a vaccine, COVID secure, it's not the future of work. It's what we need now. It's what we need to work to immediately. But actually, it's not, if COVID secure is the future of work, then there are going to be some very sterile and lifeless environments out there, and they aren't the ones that are going to produce the sort of community, and that the evidence is starting to suggest that that's what future workplaces are needed for. So this is a challenge, and what's interesting is, for all of that, this is where the majority of early FM and workspace responses have been focused. Now, I'm starting to say things which might be quite provocative, so if you want to ask questions about this towards the end of the webinar, please do, and we'll try and pick some of this stuff up. It is just a point of view, but what I want to say is, we ought to be thinking about how our own perspectives and our biases affect our own response, affect our professional responses as workplace professionals. We got to remember that no professional advice is ever really neutral, because there's always an agenda. There's always somebody who's trying to achieve something with the thing they're trying to do, and we need to be open and honest about that and wake up to that and recognize it for what it is. Maybe this is the key line in all of this, which is we need to really embrace uncertainty, and we need to learn to design for change. In all of this, this is the key thing for me. So thinking strategically about emergence, designing for adaptability, designing for flexibility, very easy to say, very hard to do when we're talking about bricks and mortar, and we're all trying to find those short-term solutions that allow us to move on. How do you keep those things open? keep the opportunities there for as things unfold and as things change, and so what we need to do really is thinking really carefully and holistically about those decisions we're making. Do they involve our people? Are we sensitive to organizational culture? And are we avoiding those extremes of opinion? If I hear one more time that the end of the office is nigh, that's not the way the world works. It's the way that we get attention and the way we get headlines in the media, but it's actually not the way reality works. So think about, am I getting drawn in an extreme direction? And maybe a key thing is, how do you want to look back and feel, or even be remembered for, to the people that you work with, in terms of how you responded to this situation? What do you stand for as a workplace leader, as a workplace practitioner? So that's kind of me and the pandemic, if you like. And so let's turn our attention now a bit more specifically to the lockdown. And as I said to you a couple of minutes ago, I was really quite wary up front of trying to work out what was going on, and I was actually quite sort of pessimistic and a little bit grounded for a while at the beginning of lockdown. If you spoke to my business partner, he's on holiday this week, so you can't find him a comment, but he was kind of almost counseling me a little bit about the future, and we were coming at this from different places. My personal response was quite cautious and worried and pessimistic, but what's quite interesting is over the weeks it started to, as there's been more and more sort of evidence and sharing of both generic data sets and more specific organizational data sets, there's been this real sort of growing evidence for the desire and the potential for more workplace flexibility. And and it's been called, and a little hat tip to Magenta here for this line, but the greatest workplace experiment never designed. Well, quite, but that doesn't mean that we can't do something with this sort of natural experiment. And I think the word that I've settled on, which frames it for me, is this word catalyst, right? If we go back to our science classes at school, our chemistry lessons, when we were doing our O-levels or our GCSEs or whatever, what is a catalyst? It's a substance that increases the rate of a chemical reaction without itself undergoing any permanent chemical change. It's a person or a thing that precipitates an event. Now, those are definitions straight out of the dictionary, but think about the lockdown as a catalyst. Okay, it's shown in a sort of Confucius way. So what I'm going to do here is I've got a slide which isn't in this deck, but it's just reminding me to say something. So do you remember that? There's the lovely little phrase about learning. Tell me and I'll forget. Show me and I may remember. Involve me and I will understand. I mean, that's a great learning principle to think about, but the very nature of the lockdown and the massive shift to home-based flexible working, that's involve me and I will understand. So all of a sudden we've got this opportunity to rethink flexibility and what workplace is because of lockdown. But the really interesting thing is, catalysts, they don't change something, they speed a reaction up. They might burn bright and they might burn fast, but they don't last. And so what I'm trying to say here is there's a real opportunity for facilities management and for workplace professionals to really think about their contribution and to do something about it. Because the challenge is that irrespective of all of our talk about futures and brave new worlds, old habits die really, really hard. And workplace change takes resource and it takes effort and it takes time and it takes commitment. And so if lockdown is a catalyst, my assertion, my thought, my feeling, and it is but a point of view, is that the people that really take advantage of this, the organizations that take advantage of it, they still design for emergence, they still design for change, they still design for flexibility and adaptability, but they take advantage of the moment. That for me is where the sort of the silver lining lies in all of this. And it was maybe inappropriate to say that way back at the beginning of lockdown, but at this point in time, it feels like that's the sort of thing we can start looking at. So now, Peter, why have my slides? Oh dear, we've gone a bit too fast now. So if I'm talking about that sort of stuff, then let's set the scene before we look at those guidance notes. And let's ask this sort of quite provocative question. Is FM ready for this flexible workplace future that lockdown and the pandemic might be catalyzing for us? So we've got some opportunities here. We've got this opportunity to really reimagine and supercharge expert workplace management, which is one of the original opportunities of FM. If you go back and you do your history of FM kind of stuff, back from the 90s, back from when Frank Duffy and DEGW were articulating the opportunity of this new thing called facilities management before it became commoditized and before it became a facility services industry. So there's this real wonderful opportunity to sort of really reimagine what true activity or task-based working might be in a distributed way at home, at work and beyond. And that means we get to reimagine the contribution of the corporate workspace. And we ought to be able to do this based on robust, relevant contextual evidence if we heed the advice from the guidance notes, which we'll talk about in a couple of slides' time. So, those are wonderful things that we can do here, and we can think more powerfully about the ergonomics of working from home. The data, my client data, broader industry data from the likes of Leisman, and others like Cushman and Wakefield are already starting to flag that some of these things might be issues in waiting. The ergonomics of working from home and being able to sit comfortably with the right tools to do the job, right? But how do we stretch past those compliance perspectives rather than throwing a health and safety assessment at it and DSE guidance and that being the contribution that we do? How do we stretch past those sorts of compliance mindsets? And how do we reinvent FM and workplace experiences to create a distributed sort of service that people really value as employees and as as people engage with organizations? These are all wonderful things we can think about, but there's big risks here as well. Flexibility is really about cultural change. You can change the spaces, you can change the technology, but it's people that you've got to bring on the journey. And has FM got the cultural competence to be able to do that? Technology, it saved the day at the beginning of lockdown for many, many businesses. Where does that put FM in the pecking order? Does that mean that we've lost brownie points to ICT and the IT departments that mobilize teams at light speed? It's quite interesting because organizations are also about power struggles as much as they're about who's responsible for what role. FM loves to react and it loves to solve problems. Return to site might be a headache for us, but it's the sort of thing that gets us out of bed in the morning. But this is about physical health and safety, physical spaces, and it's about compliance. It's not about workplace writ large, and it's not about the broader flexible opportunity. Does this mean that FM gets reinforced operationally? And we're always talking about being more strategic, but does it get reinforced operationally? And if it remains really focused on corporate property, when corporate property becomes even less of the flexibility that people are working towards and doing and making fit in their lives, then actually, what does that mean for the perceived value of facilities management? Is it? And there's an interesting thing here about how we can come out of this and how we can be stronger. And to be stronger, it means being distributed, and it means embracing flexibility, and it means thinking about the remit that facilities management has. So on that note, it's kind of time to sort of go, right, if they're big opening thoughts and they make everything current for where we are now, let's now think about these guidance notes, and let's think about how they help us reconsider, maybe just sort of check in and be sure that we're doing things the right way, or maybe power up our approach to workplace. We wrote these over a series of months. We didn't write them with the pandemic in mind, obviously, because we didn't have a crystal ball when we started writing them. But by the time we finished with them, certainly the latter couple, particularly leading successful workplace change, the pandemic was here and we were in lockdown, as we were putting these together. So, how does that work in terms of helping us think forwards now, given the situation that we're in? So the way that we tend to think in 3 Edges when we think about workplace changes, they're there in this sequence for a reason. You have to be able to understand workplace, to be able to think about the sorts of things you want to learn about it. So what data do we need to gather to be able to make better workplace decisions? If we're then going to come up with proposals for something new, the key thing that we've got to do, and the key thing that we struggle so much to do in this place, is selling our vision to the senior managers that need to give us, or the senior leaders that need to give us the green light to progress. So once we've got our solution or what we think we need to do, we've got to take it for sign off, and we've we've got to achieve buy-in. Once we achieve buy-in, then we're almost moving in delivery mode. So, how do we design the right workspace solution? That doesn't mean how do we become interior designers, interior architects, because that's not our job. But how do we understand the different principles of design thinking, perhaps, so that we get the right solution for our organizations? And then once we've got that right solution, how do we lead the organization writ large, not just the senior leaders, on that journey? So that's this discovery, this design, this deliver kind of way of working is what's really important. So what I'm going to do now is I've got one slide for each of these guidance notes. I'm just going to sort of pick up on a few key things. And Peter, I'm going to ask you politely to just keep an eye on the time for me, because I seem to be waxing lyrical today, so I need to make sure that I don't waffle on for too long. But if we take sort of highlights from an introduction to workplace, it's this recognition, and you might have seen this Venn diagram before, because it's starting to become quite established now as a way that people are starting to talk about workplace. But for us, workplace is it's the intermingling of how people work, the tools they're using, and where people work. So it's very much a social phenomenon. What we would say is spaces are empty until they're full and they become places with people, and they have to be in service of the businesses and what people are trying to get done and why they're trying to get done and why they're trying to do them. So it's interesting is this, because workplace is one of those words that there's a fancy word for it, is polysemic. And what polysemic means is it's got different meanings to different people. If you work in a particular part on that Venn, you may have your own definition of workplace that works for you. But actually, because it's polysemic, it's got lots of different meanings. And the interesting thing is, when you bring those different meanings together and you look at what workplace is and where it can antagonize, where you can complement and wind its up, where those different perspectives of workplace can help and hinder what the organization is trying to achieve, that's when you can start to really understand what's going on and do great work. So we can view workplace as a social technical system. Social because it involves people, the cultural element, and technical because it involves buildings and technology. Basically, we can see how that interplay is. It's diverse and it's distributed. It means different things to different people, and it doesn't just have to be a building, okay? And it doesn't just have to be an office. Workplace can be a football ground, can be a van, can be an ambulance, can be a hospital, can be this room, okay? It's the concept which is important and the interlinkages of this stuff, okay? It's never neutral. And what I mean by it's never neutral, it is always helping or hindering an organization in different ways. Okay, so it might be helping in this respect and hindering in that respect. The challenge is unpicking that. Okay, but holistically, it's got to enable people to be able to work better. And this means that it's got both at a high level sort of organizational importance, but at a really specific level, it's got individual importance, and it means different things to different people. And so we've really got to embrace this idea. And this is what this guidance note is about. It's showing it from these different perspectives, because once we can embrace this idea, we can see the interactions and we can start working out where it's helping and where it's hindering. And actually, the next thing that sort of falls out of this, well, hang on a minute, if that's workplace and I'm FM, do I have to own all of this now? Because I thought that was IT and I thought that was HR. And the point isn't necessarily about ownership. It's about partnership. It's about being able to work across those boundaries in service of organizational purpose. And so there's this lovely idea here that maybe this is where this notion of expert workplace management can really come to the fore. And it's that historical linkage to what FM could have been, might still be able to be, perhaps is now catalyzed to be because of the lockdown, because of the pandemic. There's a wonderful opportunity here if you start thinking about workplace in this respect. So let's make an assumption that we've kind of got workplace. And so let's move on now to say, well, now that we understand it, how do we make better workplace decisions? And how do we use data to inform those decisions? And so the second guide is kind of really thinking, you might have seen this data, information, knowledge, wisdom sort of idea before, and you might have seen this sort of doodle, but it's just showing that actually, the world's gone crackers about data, but actually data means nothing unless it's got context and it's got meaning, and you use it to make really strong insights that are evidence-based, that are considering things in the round so that you're making the right organization decisions. So you've got to think about decision making. Organizations make decisions in a range of different ways. We claim that we're rational, we have business cases, we act rationally, but actually most of the time there's also non-rational hunches and intuition in there, informed by experience and stuff like that. There's cultural effects, what would and wouldn't work for an organization because of what the organization is and what they stand for. There's even the political element, which we sort of belittle, but it's always there. You know, if you have a senior manager that doesn't buy into what you do unless you do it a particular way, then, you know, the decision is political, whether you pretend it's rational or it isn't. So there's that stuff to think about. Decisions have got anticipated and always unanticipated consequences. So we do one thing to make this happen, but then this happens as well. And maybe we didn't plan for that, but because workplace is a system, we need to be aware of that. And we need to think about the consequences, because some of those are going to matter more than others. You know, and we need to recognize the effect of the human, if you like, in both individual and organizational decisions. You know, we are subject to biases, we are subject to, you know, poor framing of situations and poor information collection. Sometimes we gather data to reinforce what we already knew all the way along. Well, why do that? It's not telling us anything new. There's all sorts of sort of cognitive biases that creep in, which we need to be aware of. And so to be able to make sure that our decisions are robust, we've got to think about, you know, we've got to think basically before we even start thinking about, you know, digital ways of collecting data, we've got to think about the basics of research methods and data collection, quantitative, qualitative information gathered in service of understanding the right things. So, you know, all of this means that in an increasingly digital world, we've got to think about ethics as well. You know, should we be collecting that data? Have we got a right to collect that data? You know, and there's this lovely little rule of thumb, which is do no harm. You should not collect anything that has the potential to do harm to somebody. And if you start thinking in those terms, what does it mean about the sort of workplace data that we can get, we should be getting, we want to gather to inform our decisions? So that's kind of guidance note 2, and that's what that's all about. So let's say then we've got this information now, and we're starting to get an idea. We've got a case that we need to do something differently with our workplace. Okay, now we need to sell the vision. And the principle of guidance note 3 is essentially that FM and workplace, we're notoriously poor at marketing. But actually, it's marketing that makes the world go around, because what we're always doing, whether we are trying to convince our boss for a raise, trying to get somebody to say yes to that project, or, you know, trying to convince our friends that we need to be going down to this pub rather than to that pub to have a drink when lockdown finishes, you know, at the end of the day, we're selling ideas. Marketing makes the world go round. So what we're after here is we're after buy-in. Buy-in is all about getting compelling evidence and a realistic plan and an emotional response. So compelling evidence, that comes from guidance note 2, that comes from the data you collect. Realistic plan, well, that's all about an appropriate workplace strategy. So in the situation we're currently in, it's about an emergent workplace strategy perhaps, but what we need is we need to elicit that emotional response. People buy into things emotionally as much as they're pretending it's completely rational. So that's how we need to start thinking to power up our workplace power. So a vision needs to be compelling, it needs to be achievable, it needs to be future oriented, and it needs to provide a really memorable way that people can see the future and that can see that the future is beneficial towards them. And to do that, actually, visions often utilize value propositions. That's not something that I've seen us as workplace professionals particularly do. Thinking in those terms, thinking about the benefits that people can expect, rather than waxing lyrical about the technical features. And so thinking like that, and that's quite a sort of design thinking, marketing way of working, actually can really power up what we're trying to do, and perhaps getting buy-in much more likely and much easier. And so whilst we're out there doing this, then workplace change, we're going to encounter all sorts of different groups of people, and, you know, different models are available, but one that works really well for us and that we use in the guidance notes is we're going to find traditionalists. That doesn't mean they're bad, but that just doesn't mean that they don't have a need or an appetite for change. We're going to encounter traditionalists. We're also going to encounter dormants that sort of need almost waking up to the opportunity. We'll find supporters, and the gold in all of this is we'll find pioneers, people that they want the change, they're up for the change, and they will become ambassadors for us and help us on the journey if we can harness their energy. So all of this is actually about how you wrap this message up in a way that really engages the audience and gets them thinking about their role in it and their power in all of it. So the practical way that you stand there and broadcast your vision, broadcast your message, and get people to buy in and understand it is really, really relevant. Okay, so moving on then, let's say we've got the buy-in, so now we've got to create our better workspace. Now, this is the guidance note that's most likely to be related to facilities management. This, if you like, is the part of the workplace then where we feel most at home. It's most likely to be involved with what we do. And what's interesting though is that so many organizations tend to see the physical part of this workspace as an overhead rather than an opportunity. And part of selling your vision is switching that opportunity on. So what we've got to recognize is that workspace, it's really emotive. It really matters in a range of different and diverse ways, both about how people can function to do their jobs, but also about how they feel about their jobs and how they feel about the organization. So easy to forget that, focus on the function and forget the feeling side of things. So we can use different models to bring these to life, and people have done this through the years: efficiency, effectiveness, expression, other models that have developed these 3 E's and added other E's to it, from, for example, Neil Usher or Kirsty Groves. The point is that workspaces are multifaceted and they need broad consideration. And once we start doing that, another way to think about this is think about workspaces as sort of Lego sets. You've only got so many bricks in the box, and you can make infinitely different models, but fundamentally you're using the same bricks. And the idea here is it's about archetypes, right? Our workspaces are rarely new. Furniture trends change, but workspaces actually, depending upon the model we use, and the one that we use in the guidance note and that we really find useful at 3 Edges is Neil Usher's 14 work styles. Okay, there are 4 families, if you like, of archetype: enclosed, open, agile, and flexible. Okay, now those four families contain 14 archetypes, which many of them have been around for decades. Okay, furniture trends come and go, but workspace design doesn't, broadly speaking. And it's important to recognize that, because once you get your eye in, you get to think like a design thinker, not like an interior designer. And then you can start thinking about, well, the most important thing here is how we engage with our people in order to make the right decisions. So once you see that, you can start spotting the different perspectives out there in the industry and using that to your advantage, because client organizations deserve the best workplaces and spaces that they can get. That's what it's about, and we should be pushing hard from that, from wherever we are in all of this. So that's that. And then finally, the final guidance note is about leading successful workplace change. So we know what we need to do, we've got the buy-in, but we need the workforce to come on the journey with us. And we know that change is notoriously hard. We know that people tend to resist it. Well, if we step back and work out what's going on, we can think about change as a noun, a thing, or an outcome. We can think about it as a verb, the process, and we can think about it as actually an approach, a state of mind, that we are essentially change agents and that we're in flux. And lockdowns and pandemics almost prove that. Okay, we have to be in flux to be able to deal with this. So we can think about responses to change, both individual and collective. And how do people react? Do they react? Do they buy into the change and seek to own it? Do they oppose it? Are they more passive? Are they sort of just obedient? Or are they apathetic? Are they inactive? All of those things, and people can react differently. They have a role to play. And so what you're really trying to do in all of this is, how do you provide people with perceived choice, honesty about the reasons for change, and help them avoid perceived loss? Because if they perceive gain and perceive choice and understand what it's in and what it's about, then you are more likely to get organizational buy-in. And so we can then start thinking about the models we use to do this. Do we want to sort of change management model? Do we want to lead people? Is it about being in charge? Is it about taking care of people in our charge? Some quite sort of philosophical things to think about there, about how you approach leadership and change and what you stand for. But I love this idea of living leadership, and we talk about it in the guidance note. It's actually more about your moral character and what you clearly stand for than it is about your ability to stand on a stage and wave your arms around. And it's not about charisma, irrespective of the Steve Jobses and the Martin Luther Kings, and these are phenomenal leaders, but that's not what organizational leadership is. This notion of to hell with great men. Actually, it's us as agents of workplace change that make all the difference. So there's lots of things to think about there, and I'm really, really conscious of time, so I'm not going to dwell anymore. But so I'm going to leave you with a couple of things before we get to Simone, and hopefully time for a few questions as well. So, okay, where can I learn more? Right, well, if you want these guides, go to the IWFM website. You might need to register, but you certainly don't need to pay. You can get those guides for free. Okay. I've already told you about a bunch of different learning and development opportunities, both CPD and the diploma, if you want to get involved at a much more learning and developmental level. The other thing that I need to say, and I think Peter's going to mention at the end, is, if all of this sounds like you would benefit from a coronavirus specific workplace course, it might be a short course that just helps you frame things, then register your interest very, very quickly, please, because we're prepared to design something and put that together for you. The last thing I'm going to leave you with before I hand over to Simone is 2 recommendations of things that you can watch, which are sort of independent to all this. Dave Coplin's RSA Animate. Dave Coplin was on Turbulent Times a good few sessions ago, a good few weeks ago now. The RSA built this animate called Reimagining Work off a speech he gave for them back in 2013. It is still as relevant now as it was then, if not more relevant, pandemic or otherwise. And then on the other side of the screen, you've got this lovely short video from The Economist about what will happen to the office. And, so valuable in that it shows not just what happens within the buildings, but the ripples that it creates within cities and the stuff that we need to think about from a sustainability perspective and from, the impact on other livelihoods and workforces. So 2 things which I would compel you to watch when you can, some point today after this session. Okay, I think that's a good point for me now to stop prattling on and hand over. Peter, are you going to step back in and just pass across to Simone?
I will do, and just say a massive thank you, Ian, for running through those 5 guides in such an articulate and short time frame. I appreciate we've got an hour today for the webinar, but a great overview of those free guidance, which is available on our website. So thank you, Ian. I just want to encourage the audience to bring questions in. I'm just going to ask for a question already, and it may be a closed question of a yes, no, don't know answer. But at the very start of Ian's presentation, he mentioned there about is FM ready for a flexible workplace future? So I like people just to start engaging with the software, and just after what you've heard from Ian and what you're going to hear from Simone now, I can do a little bit of a tally up and just get a flavour from our viewers on this webinar how they feel towards that question. So that would be interesting in its own right. So I purposely haven't put my webcam on at this stage because I'm going to pass over to Simone, who's going to go through her presentation now. So Simone, over to you.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks, Ian. Just waiting for the control to come over to me. While we're waiting for that, I'll get started. So ultimately, is what I'm going to kind of cover now is a bit of an example of how we've been working with the customer. So covering through these 5 guides, ultimately how that ties in with the kind of approach in that kind of practical, real life customer situation. So the Ricoh approach that we take is very much around engaging, enabling and evolving. And what we mean by that is creating this conscious workplace where ultimately the environment is taking that active consideration for the needs of the people, the needs of the business. And it's not in this kind of, well, I guess, let's use the words of Neil Usher, who's been quoted a few times today, but making sure it is in that continuous state of, perpetual beta. And I think from taking it from that engage, enable and evolve, which I'll talk through now how we did that with the customer, and you can get a feel for how that works. So with this particular customer, and I'm sorry I can't name them, but I couldn't get permission in time, but is how this kind of journey started was pre-COVID. It was very much they had space utilization problems. Their engagement levels from a HR perspective were quite limited and quite low. They had quite high levels of sickness as well. So we had a conversation around actually, what workplace means for them, and that conversation was happening with their property director. So ultimately, we're asking the question of, customer X at the centre of this, and then you take it out to the people, and then you take it out to the support services. Within that kind of them different circles, what are the things that what are the things that you don't know, and then what are the things you don't know. And ultimately, by asking that kind of almost, hold a mirror up, where you're starting from ultimately, you've got the elastic band and how far do you actually want to stretch it, because I think that's the crucial bit. It's sometimes we could become limited by our own thoughts. So I think it's, trying to almost say, this is the art of the possible, this is what can be done. So as we move through, ultimately our approach is very much people-centric led, and it's the approach that the organisation we're working with was also wanting to work with. So throughout this process, we started by ultimately assessing that kind of people, workspace, technology and process. And that's how, Ricoh defined the workplace: people at the centre, and then space, tech and process kind of around the outside. And by that, we're saying that let's collect that voice of the people. What is it that they're saying? What are the undercurrents of the organisation? I'm sure everybody's seen that kind of iceberg of cultural change, and you can see that there's that sticky layer between the execs and middle management, and then the people on the ground again. And is what we wanted to do here is ultimately find out, what are them unknown unknowns? What are them kind of undercurrents that are flowing? What are them comments that end up on Glassdoor that everybody goes, oh, we don't know what that's about? Getting all them little kind of, not insights, but I saw something the other day around the secrets of the organisation. What is going on there? So taking it from that initial, what are the trends, going into more the one-to-one chats, clarifying the comments, getting some more kind of qualitative feedback, and then into focus groups, and not just focus groups with the people on the ground, but at exec level as well. Coming together with all that data, ultimately the making decisions without data is, it is just merely that opinion. So how can we drive really, data that will carry the organisation into the future from a very art of the possible perspective? Is where we got to with this customer. Is we have like a workplace balance scorecard, and ultimately we did initially a remote workplace efficiency kind of rating. And the purpose of that was very much because they knew that they wanted to go into remote working in a more kind of smart and agile way, but they knew that they weren't necessarily set up for smart working, but they just didn't know what tweaks things they needed to make things more efficient. So we took the 4 pillars and we used our balance scorecard, and throughout all of the kind of data collection that we did, we ultimately said, right, at the moment, your efficiency rating is 64%. From that, we give, the enablers and the blockers in each area, and ultimately, get to a point of saying, if you want to make some really small tweaks, these are the ratings that you can get to with just small tweaks. It's not about making massive change at this point. Let's get people working remotely in a really good way, given that, we're in a pandemic as well. So for feedback that came back, like I said about the data, the things that working from home challenges, and I'm sure, these won't come necessarily as a surprise to many of you, the work-life balance and the boundaries and the routine was their kind of biggest challenge, as was the actual physical workplace setup, especially for the many that they may be in a 1-bed apartment and, they haven't got the luxury of having a desk at home. So they were the initial challenges that we kind of found, and also the homeschooling was a massive element of it. And is what we were saying to this organisation was, you can't say that this is normal remote working. We are in a pandemic. This isn't normal. Not many people would try and attempt to do their working day with kids running around their ankles. I'm pretty sure of that. So ultimately, we need to capture the problems now, but make them small tweaks. But we need to continue capturing them problems as we come out of the pandemic as well. These are things will continue to keep changing. From a biggest positive point of view, a lot of the comments were around the commute and the climate. We can all see the figures around the climate change and everything that's happened, even since things have started ramping up again. And people, the comments around that were really positive. Some people were travelling up to 3 hours a day for a commute, and they were massively kind of enjoying the fact that they didn't have to do that and they got more time with the family. Also, then that impact on the climate as well. The productivity and less distractions, and I found that an interesting one. If we're trying to do concentration work in an office, is that the best way? I'm sure we could have a whole different webinar on that. And then the work-life kind of well-being as well was a big aspect. Part of the data collection as well is to find little trends. So one thing that kind of kept coming up throughout the feedback was the temperature of the workplace, the noise, and just general kind of stuffiness of the environment. So we use sensors to actually start capturing some of that information. And is what we found was as much as the HVAC system was absolutely running smooth on the face of it, when you look at this average ambient temperature, there were certain elements that were affecting the temperatures of the space. And it wasn't just the vents, but it was also where the canteen was placed and things like that, and also the lighting. So just looking into different aspects like that, but actually basing it on data rather than kind of the anecdotal and feel warm, because that's such a kind of, perceptive thing anyway. And then also collecting data around how spaces were used. So you can see from here that from the desks, the general offices, the rooms and the collaboration spaces, you can see that the daily churn and also the dwell time. So people are spending obviously a long time at a desk and are staying there kind of static, but a collaboration space, they're doing that quick kind of turnover, and it's it is quite kind of quick changing, and same with the rooms. So I think again, just having that data to base some of these decisions on. Part of the challenge as well the organisation was having was saying that if we want to encourage people to come to the workplace to do the team aspects, the meetings, the innovation, we just don't have enough meeting rooms. Now, as you can see from the actual data, that just isn't the case. Not only the availability is generally averaging at around 25%, but also look at how many no-shows there were, look at how many squatters there were, and then also how much it was actually only 25 to 30% around that people were actually in physical meetings that had actually been booked. So I think just looking at that kind of data to say, well, we don't need to make drastic changes to the layout of our organisations. Ultimately, we need to use our spaces better, not utilising them. So the initial challenges, once they kind of got through the we know the vision, we know what we want to do. Some of the challenges that they had was around that exec buy-in, not only because of the status of FM, but obviously financially we are in the middle of a pandemic. And then the other bits as well was like getting that kind of proof around the impact of that out of the possible. Execs kind of doing that whole, oh, it's not their idea, so they don't want to do it. Maybe a lack of trust around people that wanted to work in a different way. The IT investment that was needed, and also the changes in HR culture, moving HR from being almost a policing, sickness and absence and performance, to more of that enabler of the business and enabler of the people. So there's some of the kind of quick challenges that this organisation had. And to overcome them challenges, this is where the data kind of collection came in, looking at things like recruitment and retention, engagement, sickness, and then also the voice insights from the actual people on the ground. Also the exec workshops, looking at what the future was, the assumptions and the biases that were there, evaluating the risks of ultimately not making the changes that were being proposed, and looking at that return on investment. The next part of that was then obviously the positive voices in the room, the ones that were on side, was leveraging them as key stakeholders, taking them strong voices and using them to drive that initial proof of concept study. And the initial proof of concept study showed that actually the assumptions that were made throughout this was correct, and we then went into the bigger piece of work. So that the element of creating better workspaces, what that looked like for this organisation, a lot of it came down to the culture, as it often does. What was the mission of the organisation? What are the values? And are the people aligned to them values? And are them values kind of practiced and behaved every day? Because if they're not values, they're just things that are wrote on a wall. And then driving that into what the smart working policy looked like. And they specifically said they needed a written policy. So that was fine, and it was, these are the things that ultimately wanted to have the policy that they can then drive down into the leadership training, and then ultimately drive it down into the leadership training. Sorry about that, 1 second. And then look at the physical changes that might be needed in the spaces to enable collaboration, and that wasn't necessarily the meeting rooms, but just certain other spaces. And then looking at things like the amendments, rewards and recognition packages, because that was effectively engagement as well. The digitisation of processes to enable people to work remotely and still obviously do their actual jobs. And then obviously a lot of it came down as well to technology, implementing Microsoft Teams, things like interactive whiteboards and proper AV meeting rooms, desk booking systems and meeting room booking systems, and then the sensors to continually collect that information. But this is the stage that we're at now, and I'll just end with this kind of, what this will look like in the future. So ultimately, we're leading through that successful kind of workplace change at the moment, and the aims and how we're going to do this with the organisation are very much creating that strong vision and doing that communication around the why and the benefits, getting that really strong leadership buy-in as well at all levels, and that also includes change champions and the change team as well to really keep this on track. I think, to make any changes like this, it does need that mindset of that agility, resilience, and bravery. We need to not just kind of go, oh, this is not working. Let's just kind of kick it into touch. It's not going to be a slow process. It's going to be something that we constantly learn and evolve through. And that's where the data comes in, and also that external support, holding the mirror up to the organisation. I think it is quite easy to become institutionalised. So it is good to have somebody validating what is happening, and also, almost holding you to account to where you want to get to and keeping you on track as well. I'm going to kind of shut up talking a second now and let Ian fire some thoughts of his at us as well.
Well, do you know, it's interesting is this, because we've only got 5 minutes left mainly, and I'm sorry about this because I've prattled on far too much beforehand, but yeah, well, there's almost a parting thing. There's an observation and there's a sort of comparison here. The parting thing is, you told a story there about one of the many projects you're involved with, but you can see the guidance notes alive, both the sequence and the content. And I know you sort of, maybe the last 3 guidance notes, you sort of specifically talked to them. What I saw with the workspaces page was actually it was alive with workplace. It just shows how interlinked it is. And on your final slide, Simon, when you said, for you it's agility, it's resilience and bravery, think about how valuable they are against the 3 things I was talking about, which is emergence, adaptability and flexibility. They're 6 words, but they mean so much in terms of the situation that we're currently in. Peter, where should we go from here?
Yeah, I think we're going to move on to questions. We have got a couple through. I did do a straw poll and the audience have engaged with that, so thank you. Most of the people did say they were, we had a bit of a mix, but generally they felt that they were ready to for the workplace future, where the question was asked, is FM ready for a flexible workplace future? But I'm just intrigued, Simone, tying in with that question, from your understanding from clients and that, do you think that's the case on your experience with customers? Do you think FM is ready for this?
I think it's very mixed. I think we only have to look back to the research that 3Edges did a few years ago around that FM enabling, technology and the embracing technology. And I don't think FM has necessarily caught up with the technology yet. And I'm not just saying that because I work for a tech company. I'm seeing it from an FM point of view. As I know that when I went into Ricoh, even myself, I had no idea that some of this technology was available. And I'd worked in FM for years. And I think it's that kind of almost look at what other organisations are doing, and I think that's the bit where FM really need to kind of get into what we can do to not only just enable the people, but capture that continuous data to keep evolving. We need to come past the whole, every 4 or 5 years or whatever, we do some workplace change and it results a fit out company popping in and doing some changes. We need to come away from that and go more into the deeper stuff.
So I'm going to go through quick fire round because we've got a load of questions, and ironically a lot of feedback on our webinars is people love these to be longer as well as have more question time. So aware we're up against the clock, so might slightly go over 1 as advertised, but promise it won't be any later than 5 past. So apologies for those that will have to leave bang on 1, but as I said, this webinar will be recorded. So it'd be a rapid question fire round. Hopefully the answers can be short, concise, but that doesn't always mean that it's not the right answer. Right. I had a question in from Claire. Thank you for this. Where is FM in the pecking order within organisations? I think they were referring to both your presentations, where one reference was to IT respectively in yours, Ian, and HR in yourself, Simone. So from your experiences, both with your I guess, consultant hats on to a degree, where do you believe FM is in the pecking order when we're up against HR and IT? So, Ian, can I start with you on that question? Have you got a
Well,
view?
one of my early comments was that, I think it was on guidance note 1. It was about, this isn't necessarily about ownership, it's about partnership. So pecking orders, if we're thinking like that, then something's wrong, right? But I do think that because of the ability for IT saved the day, they just did, right? And us saving the day is a return to the office. But why do you need to go back to the office? For given the situation, surely that's minimal, and surely that's the thing that you might need to for some, and it might be appropriate for some, but generally, because the amount of space you got, it's not the right thing to do. So if then FM then steps in to sort of save the day in its very operational troubleshooty kind of way, I'm not sure that is about that. I'm not sure it serves it well in the long run. And I do think we don't think politically in our industry. I think we think very functionally, and I don't think we think politically.
Oh, thank you. And Simone, did you want to add to that? I guess,
Yeah.
would you echo those views about the pecking order? Is that possibly being polite to the questionnaire? Is that the right mindset to have?
I mean, absolutely. I think I agree with Ian. If we're looking for a pecking order, we're still kind of trying to elbow another department out of the way. And I guess is what we do need to do is get that partnership of HR, IT, facilities working in harmony to do that kind of enable the people, enable the business. The support services and the support services for a reason. And I think, I guess I did see a bit of a shift in, instead of IT potentially being a bit of a blocker previously. I think throughout the pandemic, I think is what's happened is HR have driven things, and IT have just had to go, yes, we can do it, we're going to have to do it. And I think IT have really stepped up to the plate, and it's been really positive. FM, you still see many FMs that are still on furlough still. So I think that kind of is a bit of a sign of where the pecking order, I guess, is, if there was a pecking order.
Yeah, so I've got a bit of a theme running through the questions, and thank you for those individuals that have sent questions in. It ties in with a point that I'm going to raise earlier and was mentioned in Ian's presentation around skills and training. Obviously, as a professional body, that's at a close to our hearts in terms of our strategy and who and what we are. But is this whole issue a skills issue when it comes to FM workplace, or is it about behaviour and culture for FM really to then be this catalyst for change within the workplace? So how much of is this skills related, or is it behaviour and change? So Ian, I'd like you to kick off with that, and then Simone.
Okay, they're one and the same for me. You're right. In the same way that you, the only way to make progress in all of this is to think about things as systems, right? And it's hard and it's complicated, but the whole industry, the whole workplace profession is a system, right? And we've learned to do some things well, and we don't have strong education. We don't have hundreds of universities across the world offering qualifications in FM and workplace. That says something, okay? Now, if we want to change that system, we change it by organizational contribution, we change it by learning and development opportunities where we can get them. We think in those terms. So it's about operational cultural competence, it's about learning that and trying it. It's about all of those things together. It's like the pandemic, right? You can't solve the pandemic as an island, as one country, right? Because the only way to do that is pull up your drawbridge, and the minute the drawbridge comes down, you've got a problem again. Systems are open. You can't solve them by keeping them closed.
And Simone, someone that I know well over the years, obviously you've gone through that skills qualifications, you're now at Ricoh leading up obviously their workplace division there. I just wondered, from your point of view, from your experience, how much of it is a mix of skills or behaviour change?
Yeah, I think from my personal perspective, it was fell into our FM, as many do, and I decided that I was going to do a formal qualification just so that I could, I guess, on paper, formally progress myself. I'd always had an appetite for learning and always kind of been driving myself, an avid reader and things, but I think the formal qualification for me at the time was a little bit of a tick box. And now I think it's become more and more important, and I totally, as soon as I started the course, I was like, oh yeah, it's not a tick box, I really value this. But initially it was a bit of a, almost my behaviour that kind of drove that kind of the changes and the thinking, because I was like, I just want something better than this. And I think it was me that kind of just, people always kind of go workplace rebel and things, and it's not a rebel in that kind of bad way, I guess, that I used to see it, is that I just wanted some change to happen quite quickly. So I just kind of went out and did it.
I would call that
a plug here for our conference. Quite a book that I relate to is Be More Pirate, which Sam Cotniff, one of our speakers at our conference on the 25th of September, actually talks about that, I guess, rebellion, but brings it into the modern day world of where the first rebels were the pirates. So interesting book, and please find out more as Sam speaks at our conference. I have to really apologise at this point. We can't go for any more questions because of time, but I do promise the viewers that have sent questions in, I will respectively pass them on to Ian and Simone to get the answers back. So we talked about partnership, and as you can see on your screens there, all the guides there we've done in partnership with Ricoh, and as Ian's kindly gone through them today, the 5 guides are available on our hub, Creating Better Workplaces. So at this point I want to say a massive thank you to Ian and Simone for joining us today on the webinar, and I've just got a few couple closing slides just to remind people of a few things we're doing at the Institute. We talk about information, this linked to our Turbulent Times series. Obviously COVID-19, Ian talked about some of his own viewpoints, and he did clarify that around COVID-19 and the pandemic. We are updating this resource on a frequent basis, so please look out on our website for this. Still very much relevant, and obviously it takes up everyone's time, particularly on the media agenda, considering what we're all going through and experiencing. So please look out on our website for this. Also, Ian referenced it as a promised, and it linked to some of our last question in the Q&A. We are seeking views on a potential new training course, workplace opportunities in a post-pandemic world. We have set up a URL link web page today, so please visit that to register your interest. We really want to know your feedback on this. As well as talking about feedback, there is a survey after this webinar to get your views on this webinar, as well as drive our future program of work for our series. So please engage with that. Feedback's important. We just need to know the appetite on that. So as referenced by Ian, just reminding our viewers there how you actually can register your interest for that potential training course. Again, on every webinar, we talk about question case studies. We would welcome that. We want your feedback views, so please send them into the email address there. We have had many over the last 17 episodes, so please continue to bring them in. I know there's regular listeners, viewers on these webinars, as well as new listeners, viewers today, so please engage with us. We want to know your feedback and case studies. That would be great. Now, lastly, apologies about timekeeping today, but we just slightly gone over one. At this point, I want to say this was our 17th episode of our series, and the 18th episode will be in early September. So please wipe away the tears from your eyes. The fact is, we will be rekindling the series in September, so we're having a little bit of a break, but what we'll be doing is reminding people of the great episodes we had to date, and even one that was mentioned there from Dave Coplin that we will be repeating across the 3 weeks that we're off. So please look out for the information for our next webinar. And from lastly to you, the listeners, viewers that have joined us on our 17 episodes over this period, thank you, and we welcome your feedback, as I said, and please look out for our episode 18, which is early September. So take care, keep safe, and I hope you enjoyed this webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks.